For 7 consecutive years, I spent every Christmas alone, believing my boyfriend was caring for his dying mother, only to discover I was actually fully supporting a man who has a wife and a 5-year-old son. I transferred $242,000 of my life savings to him, thinking I was saving his family from bankruptcy. But the truth is, I was just funding his double life at a luxury ski resort. My name is Taylor, and I feel like my heart has been ripped out of my chest while I lay in bed recovering from surgery 3 days ago. He left me without a second thought. Now, I am sitting in my freezing truck outside a 5-star hotel in Vermont, watching him wear the tuxedo I paid for while he kisses an heiress. He is not broke. He is not grieving. He is a fraud who used my love to maintain his status with a wealthy woman. I am holding the bank statements that prove every single lie he has told for the last decade. I am about to walk into their holiday party and expose him in front of everyone. I am terrified, but I have nothing left to lose. I am about to destroy his entire world tonight. Please tell me, what would you do? If you looked at my personnel file at St. Mary's Hospital in West Haven, Connecticut, you would see the basics typed out in sterile. Black font, Taylor, 34 years old, registered nurse, specialized in trauma and post-operative care, single, no living dependents, but paper cannot capture the suffocating weight of the silence that currently fills my living room. It cannot describe the specific, hollow ache of being an orphan during the holidays, or the humiliating desperation of a woman clinging to a man who is already halfway out the door. I lay curled on the beige sectional sofa, my body buried under 3 layers of heavy wool blankets. The heating in our rented colonial-style house was set to 72 degrees, yet I could not stop shivering. The aftermath of my laparoscopic surgery 3 days ago was supposed to be manageable, but my body felt heavy, as if my bones had been replaced with lead pipes. The painkillers, a prescription of Percocet that I had been trying to ration, cast a hazy, cotton-like fog over my brain. From my position on the couch, I watched Mark. He was standing by the foyer mirror, adjusting the collar of his charcoal cashmere coat. He looked immaculate. At 36, Mark possessed the kind of polished, symmetrical handsomeness that made people trust him instantly. He looked like a man who belonged on a yacht in the Hamptons or in a boardroom in Manhattan, not scraping ice off a windshield in a quiet, middle-class suburb. I watched him pick up his leather weekender bag. It was a Louis Vuitton Keepall 45, the monogram canvas gleaming under the warm, recessed lighting of the hallway. I remembered the day I bought that bag for him. It was a congratulatory gift for a business deal he claimed was about to close. That was 2 years ago. The deal never closed, but the bag remained, a shiny symbol of the lifestyle he felt entitled to and the lifestyle I was financing on a nurse's salary. Mark turned to look at me. His blue eyes were clear, bright, and completely devoid of empathy. He did not look like a man leaving his recovering girlfriend alone for Christmas. He looked like a man inconvenienced by a piece of broken furniture. "Babe, are you sure you do not want me to call a service for you?" Mark asked. His voice was smooth, laced with a concern that did not reach his eyes. It was a tone I knew well. It was the tone he used when he wanted to sound like the victim of my circumstances. I forced myself to sit up slightly, wincing as a sharp pain shot through my lower abdomen. "I do not need a service. Mark, I need you. It is Christmas Eve tomorrow. Can you not just wait one more day? Or maybe drive up on Christmas morning?" Mark Sehill. It was a long, theatrical exhale that signaled his patience was wearing thin. He walked over to the couch, But he did not sit down. He loomed over me, checking his Rolex Submariner watch. Another gift, another month of my overtime shifts. We talked about this. Taylor, he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming stern. My mother is frail. Her heart condition gets worse in the winter. If I do not go now, I might miss the window before the storm hits upstate. Do you really want me to risk driving in a blizzard just because you want someone to fetch you water? I felt the familiar twist in my stomach. It was the guilt he planted there, a seed he watered daily. He made me feel selfish for existing, for having needs. It is not about water, I whispered, my throat dry. I just, saluting Hao Ling. 2 hashes greater than I do not want to be alone. Not this year. It is the first Christmas since my dad died. I saw a flicker of annoyance cross his face, gone as quickly as it appeared. He crouched down, but he did not touch me. He rested his hands on his own knees, maintaining a physical barrier between his expensive wool trousers and my sweatpants. Taylor, look at you, he said softly. You are a mess. You have been moping around since the surgery, letting the house get dusty, letting yourself go. You are depressed. And quite frankly, it is exhausting to be around. If I stay, we will just fight. You will cry about your dad. You will complain about the pain. And you will ruin the holiday for both of us. His words were like precise surgical incisions. Clean, deep. He was rewriting reality right in front of me. I was not a grieving daughter recovering from a medical procedure. In his version of the story, I was a lazy, emotional burden who was sabotaging his happiness. Maybe you are right, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I hated myself for agreeing, for seeking his approval even as he insulted me. This was the disease of our 7-year relationship. I was the host, and he was the parasite that convinced me I could not survive without him. Mark stood up, satisfied. He smoothed down his coat. Exactly. I am doing this for us. I need to go see my mother, make sure she is okay, and secure my inheritance. Once she passes, we will have everything. Taylor, the big house, the weddings, everything you want. But I need to play the part of the good son right now. You understand that, right? I nodded weakly. The promise of the future, that was always his carrot on a stick. Just a little more money, just a little more time, just a little more patience. He leaned in and pressed a kiss to my forehead. His lips were cold. He smelled of Santal 33 cologne, a scent of sandalwood and leather that used to make my heart race, but now just made me feel nauseous. Get some rest, he said, pulling away. Do not call me unless it is an emergency. Mom hates it when my phone buzzes at the dinner table. She thinks it is rude. He walked to the door, grabbed the handle of his Louis Vuitton bag, and paused. Oh, and Taylor, try to get up and walk around a bit. The doctor said movement helps recovery. Lying there feeling sorry for yourself is not going to heal you. The door clicked shut. The sound echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. I listened to the heavy thud of his footsteps on the porch, then the aggressive roar of the engine. It was my car he was taking, a black Audi Q5 that I had leased under my name because his credit score was supposedly under audit due to a business identity theft issue. He had taken the keys from the kitchen counter without even asking. The tires crunched against the gravel driveway. Fading into the distance, silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I lay back down, pulling the blanket up to my chin. The living room was perfectly decorated. The 12-foot Douglas fir tree in the corner was draped in tasteful white lights and silver ornaments, just the way Mark liked it. The mantel was lined with fresh garland. It looked like a page out of a glossy lifestyle magazine. Perfect, expensive, cold. My eyes drifted to the side table where a framed photograph of my father sat. He was smiling, holding up a fishing trophy, wearing a flannel shirt that smelled of pine and sawdust. He died last December 22nd. Today was the 1-year anniversary of his funeral. Mark knew that. Mark knew exactly what today was. I reached for the bottle of water on the floor, my hand trembling. As I drank, I looked around the room that I paid for, looking at the decorations I bought, thinking about the car my boyfriend was driving away in. A thought, small and sharp, pricked the back of my mind. It was a thought I had suppressed for years, burying it under layers of denial and fear of abandonment. He did not even ask if I had enough food in the fridge. He did not check if I could reach my medication. He took the car, leaving me trapped here in the suburbs with no way to get to the hospital if my stitches tore. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness take over. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the painkillers and the heartbreak, a tiny alarm bell began to ring. It was quiet, distant, but persistent. It was the sound of my survival instinct, waking up from a 7-year coma. But for now, I was too weak to listen. I just let the tears leak out, hot and salty, sliding into my hair as I drifted into a chemically induced sleep. Alone in the house that Mark built with my money, the house did not just feel empty. It felt haunted. I woke up hours later. The room now pitched in the heavy, blue-black darkness of early evening. The Christmas tree lights had turned on automatically, casting long, skeletal shadows against the walls. My mouth tasted like copper and old sleep. I sat up, the pull of the stitches in my abdomen serving as a sharp anchor to reality. The silence of the house was a roar in my ears. It was a familiar sound, one that transported me back exactly 365 days. Last year, the air had felt just like this, heavy, stagnant. I closed my eyes and I was back there. The funeral home, the smell of lilies and floor wax. My father lying in the casket, looking smaller than I ever remembered him. I had stood by the receiving line for 4 hours, shaking hands with strangers who offered generic condolences. I kept looking at the door, waiting for the tall, broad-shouldered silhouette of Mark to appear. He never came. That night, when I called him, sobbing into the receiver, he had been in his car, allegedly driving to his mother's house. He had told me, with that same smooth, reasonable voice, that the plane tickets were non-refundable and that his mother was having episodes of angina. He said, "Taylor, you know I love your dad, but the living need me more right now. Do not be selfish." I had swallowed my rage then. I had apologized to him for being needy while he was dealing with a sick mother. I had let him convince me that my grief was a burden he should not have to carry during the holidays. I was so terrified of losing the only person I had left that I allowed him to step over my father's memory without consequence. Now, sitting in the dark 1 year later, that memory clawed at my throat. It was a pattern, a cycle. Every time I was at my lowest, Mark had a family emergency that required him to be geographically distant. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, vibrating against the glass surface. The sound made me jump. I reached for it, hoping, pitifully, that it was Mark checking in. Maybe he had felt guilty. Maybe he had turned the car around. It was not a text message. It was a notification from the bank application for the Platinum American Express card. I stared at the screen, my eyes adjusting to the harsh blue light. Transaction alert. $5,240 approved at Sapphire Peaks Jewelry. I blinked. I read it again. $5,000. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A frantic, erratic rhythm. This was the supplementary card I had given Mark 3 years ago. It was strictly for emergencies. I had emphasized that word. Emergencies. A flat tire. A tow truck. An urgent flight home. I unlocked the phone and tapped on the transaction details. The merchant location was listed clearly. White Pine Resort, Vermont. My brain tried to process the geography. Mark had told me he was driving to his hometown in rural New Hampshire, a decaying mill town called Berlin. I knew where Berlin was. It was north, far north. White Pine Resort was west. It was an exclusive, high-altitude ski destination known for $600 lift tickets and celebrities seeking privacy. It was 200 miles away from where his mother supposedly lived in squalor. Maybe he stopped on the way? I whispered to the empty room. I opened the map application on my phone. I typed in the route to get from our house in Connecticut to Berlin, New Hampshire. You drove straight up Interstate 91. To get to White Pine Resort, you had to veer west almost immediately and drive deep into the mountains of Vermont. It was not a pit stop. It was a detour that took 4 hours. A cold dread settled in my stomach, far colder than the winter air outside. Why was he at a luxury ski resort? And why was he spending over $5,000 at a jewelry store when he claimed his family was drowning in medical debt? I pressed the call button next to his name. The phone rang. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Please pick up. I thought, pick up and tell me there is a mistake. Tell me the card was stolen. Tell me you are at a gas station in New Hampshire, eating a stale sandwich. It went to voicemail. I called again immediately. My thumb hit the screen with force. This time, on the 4th ring, the line clicked open. Taylor? Mark's voice came through, but it sounded strange. He was breathless. The wind was whipping loudly in the background, distorting his words. Mark, where are you? I asked. My voice was trembling, betraying the panic rising in my chest. I am Saud Singha Ling. 2 hash is greater than I am at the rest stop. He huffed. He sounded like he was exerting himself. Why are you calling me back to back? Is the house on fire? I gripped the phone tighter. You are at a rest stop? Which one? The one near the border. He snapped. Look, the signal is terrible here. What is it? Taylor? I just got a notification. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The American Express card. It was just charged $5,000 at a jewelry store. At Sapphire Peaks, there was a pause on the other end of the line. It lasted only 2 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Oh, that, Mark said. His tone shifted instantly from annoyance to a forced, condescending calm. Yes, that, I said. Mark, Sapphire Peaks is in White Pine. That is a ski resort in Vermont. You are supposed to be in New Hampshire with your sick mother. Why is my card being used 200 miles away from where you are supposed to be? I heard a sound in the background. It sounded like music. Faint, festive jazz music, and laughter. Taylor, seriously? Mark let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. You are stalking my location now? I stopped to buy you a gift. A gift? I repeated. Yes, a gift, he shouted over the wind. I took a detour because I heard this specific jeweler had the vintage cut diamond earrings you have been drooling over for months. I wanted to surprise you for New Year's Eve, since I could not be there for Christmas. I drive 4 hours out of my way to do something nice for you. And this is what I get? An interrogation? I hesitated. The explanation was plausible. Mark was impulsive. He loved grand gestures when he felt like it, but Saoyutsing Haoling, 2 is greater than $5,000. Mark, we are saving for a house. And you said your mom. My mom is fine. He cut me off. I mean, she is not fine. She is dying. But I have plenty of time to get there. God, Taylor, listen to yourself. You sound paranoid. Are you still taking those painkillers? Saoyutsing Haoling. Get to. Yes. But Saoyutsing Haoling. Are Jinghao Dayu. That is it? Then, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. You are high. The Percocet is messing with your head. You are sitting there alone, popping pills and inventing conspiracies because you are insecure. It is pathetic. Taylor, I felt the shame wash over me. Hot and stinging. Was I being paranoid? The doctor had warned me about mood swings. Saoyutsing Haoling, 2 is greater than I just wanted to know. I stammered. It is a lot of money. It is an investment in us. He said, I am trying to build a future here. I am trying to make you happy. But if you are going to be an ungrateful brat about it, maybe I should just return them. Is that what you want? Do you want me to take the earrings back? No, I whispered. I felt small. I felt like the crazy, nagging girlfriend he always accused me of being. Good, he said. Now, stop checking the bank alerts. Go to sleep. You are acting hysterical. I have to get back on the road before the snow gets worse. Do not call me again tonight. I need to focus on driving. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. My hand was shaking uncontrollably now. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe that he was just a misunderstood romantic, driving through a blizzard to buy me diamonds. It would explain everything. It would make me the villain and him the hero. A dynamic I was comfortable with, but something was wrong. I closed my eyes and replayed the call in my head. He said he was at a rest stop. Rest stops do not have jazz music playing in the background. Rest stops do not have the distinct, clinking sound of crystal glasses toasting, which I was certain I had heard just before he hung up. And there was one other thing. When he answered the phone, he was out of breath. Not the heavy breathing of someone who had just walked from a car to a gas station. It was the rhythmic, exhilarated panting of someone who had just finished a physically demanding activity, like skiing. I looked at the empty bottle of Percocet on the side table. Mark was right. I was medicated. My judgment was compromised, but my gut was screaming. I threw the blanket off my legs. A sharp pain tore through my incision site, making me gasp. I ignored it. I swung my legs over the edge of the couch and stood up. The room spun for a moment, then steadied. I limped into the kitchen and grabbed my laptop. I needed to see the statement on a bigger screen. I logged into the American Express portal. There it was. Sapphire Peaks Jewelry, White Pine Resort. I clicked on the merchant details. It provided a phone number. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 7:30 in the evening. Retail stores and resorts usually stayed open late during the holidays. I dialed the number on the screen, putting the phone on speaker. Thank you for calling Sapphire Peaks. A voice chirped. This is Jessica. How can I help you sparkle this evening? Hi, I said, my voice thick. Saoyutsing Haoling. 2 is greater than. I think my husband just made a purchase there. He lost the receipt and is panicking. I just wanted to confirm the item so I can note it for our insurance. His name is Mark. Mark Anderson. I held my breath. Oh, yes, Mr. Anderson, the woman said cheerfully. He was just in here. Such a charming man. He bought the emerald tennis bracelet, a stunning piece. He said it was a perfect match for his wife's eyes. The world stopped spinning. It just froze. My eyes were brown. Mark knew my eyes were brown. He had written a poem about them in our first year of dating. Emeralds were green, and he had told the sales clerk it was for his wife. I did not say thank you. I did not say goodbye. I pressed the red button to end the call and stared at the dark window. The reflection, looking back at me, was pale, disheveled, and looked like it was breaking apart. He was not driving to his mother's. He was at a resort. He bought a bracelet for someone with green eyes. The pain in my abdomen vanished, replaced by a cold, numbing shock. The tears that had been flowing earlier dried up instantly. I was not crazy. I was being played. I looked at the car keys hanging on the hook by the door. Not my keys. Mark had taken those. These were the keys to my father's old pickup truck, a rusted Ford F-150 that I had kept in the garage because I could not bear to sell it. It had no heating. The suspension was shot, and the tires were balding. 2. But it ran. I walked to the closet and pulled out my heavy winter parka. I grabbed a scarf and wrapped it tight. I walked to the bathroom cabinet, took 2 more pain pills, and swallowed them dry. Mark thought I was weak. He thought I was trapped in this house, sedated and compliant. He thought he could gaslight me into silence from 200 miles away. He was wrong. I grabbed the truck keys. The metal felt cold and jagged in my palm. I am coming, Mark. I whispered to the empty house. I opened the front door and stepped out into the biting winter wind. The heater in my father's 1998 Ford F-150 had died 5 years ago, a casualty of his stubborn refusal to spend money on anything he deemed a luxury. Now, as I merged onto the interstate, the cabin of the truck was a meat locker. My breath came out in jagged white clouds that fogged up the windshield, forcing me to wipe the glass with my sleeve every few minutes. I had swallowed 2 more Percocet before leaving the driveway. It was a dangerous amount. I knew that. As a nurse, I knew the respiratory depression risks, the way it dulled the reflexes. But I needed the chemical barrier. My abdomen felt like it was being held together by staples and fire. Every bump in the road sent a shockwave through my pelvis. A sharp reminder that I should be in a hospital bed, not hurtling through a nor'easter in a vehicle with bald tires. The radio was broken, leaving me with nothing but the roar of the wind and the terrifying loop of my own thoughts. He bought emeralds because they match her eyes. The sentence replayed in my mind, syncing with the rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the sales clerk was confused. Maybe Mark was buying it for his mother. Maybe he lied about the eye color to sound romantic to a stranger. I was bargaining with reality, desperate to keep the illusion of my life intact for just a few more miles. I decided to go to the house first. Mark's parents' house in Berlin, New Hampshire, was the cornerstone of his sob stories. He had described it in vivid detail over the years. The leaking roof he was paying to fix, the outdated boiler that cost $3,000 to replace, the ramp he had to install for his mother's wheelchair. I had poured thousands of dollars into that house through him. It was only an hour out of my way to verify if he was there, if the Audi was in the driveway, if I saw lights in the windows. Then the jewelry store charge was just a misunderstanding. I could turn around, go home, and hate myself for doubting him. I clung to that hope. It was a pathetic, fragile thing, but it was all I had. The drive took longer than it should have. The snow began to fall in heavy, wet sheets, reducing visibility to near zero. By the time I reached the outskirts of Berlin, the town looked like a graveyard of industry. Rusted mills, boarded-up storefronts, and potholed roads that rattled my teeth. I turned onto Oak Street. I knew the address by heart because I had written it on so many checks. Number 42. I slowed the truck to a crawl. The headlights cut through the swirling snow, illuminating the houses one by one. 38, 40, and then 42. I stopped the truck in the middle of the street. There was no other traffic. The house was there, but it was not the home Mark had described. It was a corpse of a building. The windows were boarded up with plywood that had turned gray with rot. The front porch had collapsed on one side. The driveway, where Mark's Audi should have been, was knee-deep in untouched snow. There were no tire tracks, no footprints, no sign of life. I rolled down the window, the freezing wind slapping my face. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the passenger seat and shone it at the front door. There, nailed to the peeling white paint, was a notice. It was bright orange, vibrant against the decay. Notice of foreclosure. Property of Citizens Bank. Do not enter. I squinted to read the fine print through the snow. The date of seizure was listed clearly. October 14th, 2021. 3 years ago, the flashlight beam wavered in my shaking hand. 3 years. Mark had been collecting money from me for repairs on a house that his family did not even own anymore. The boiler, the roof, the ramp. It was all fiction. I felt a wave of nausea so violent, I had to lean my head out the window, gagging on the cold air. Where were they? If they were not here, and if Mark was at a luxury resort, Sao Jinghaoling, or Jinghao Dayu. My phone lay on the seat next to me. I picked it up and punched in the address for White Pine Resort, 2 hours west. I should have turned around. I should have gone home, called the police, and reported fraud. But rage is a fuel more potent than gasoline. It burned through the painkillers, through the exhaustion, through the fear. I put the truck in gear. The tires spun on the ice for a sickening second before finding traction. I did not turn back. I headed west, into the mountains. The drive to White Pine was a surreal transition. As I climbed in elevation, the roads became smoother, the snowplows more frequent. The decaying towns were replaced by quaint villages with fairy lights wrapped around every lamppost. I passed signs for artisanal cheese shops and heated gondola rides. I arrived at the resort gates just after 10 o'clock at night. The place looked like a fortress of wealth. Massive timber beams, stone chimneys puffing wood smoke into the night sky, and a fleet of Range Rovers and Teslas parked under the porte cochere. I parked my rusted truck in the far corner of the overflow lot, wedged between a snowbank and a dumpster. It was fitting. I felt like trash. I pulled my hood up, wrapping my scarf around the lower half of my face. I walked toward the main lodge, my boots crunching loudly on the packed snow. The cold was biting, finding every gap in my coat. But I was numb. The lobby of the White Pine Resort was an assault on the senses. It was massive, with a vaulted ceiling that soared 3 stories high. A fire the size of a small car roared in a central stone hearth. The air smelled of expensive cedar, roasted chestnuts, and money. People were milling about, dressed in après-ski attire that cost more than my annual salary. Women in fur-lined boots, men in cashmere, sweaters. They held crystal flutes of champagne and laughed with the ease of people who have never had to check a bank account balance before buying groceries. I moved to the side of the room, standing in the shadow of a large potted spruce tree. I felt dizzy. The heat of the room was overwhelming after the freezing truck. I scanned the crowd. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. A dull thud, thud, thud that drowned out the jazz quartet playing in the corner. And then I saw him. He was sitting on a plush leather sofa near the fireplace, his back to me, but I knew the set of his shoulders. I knew the way he ran his hand through his hair. He was wearing a cream-colored cable knit sweater. Ralph Lauren. I noted. I had seen him browsing it online last month, but he told me it was too expensive. He was not alone. Sitting across from him in a sleek, motorized wheelchair was a woman. She was beautiful in a fragile, porcelain way. She had dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and was wrapped in a mink shawl. This had to be Sarah, and next to her, holding a glass of red wine, was a woman I recognized instantly from photographs, though I had never met her in person. Evelyn, Mark's mother, the woman who was supposed to be at death's door in a freezing house in New Hampshire. She looked vibrant. Her hair was dyed a fresh, honey blonde. She was wearing a sequined cocktail dress and laughing at something Mark said, throwing her head back. She did not look like a woman with a failing heart. She looked like a woman enjoying a 5-star vacation. I felt my knees buckle. I reached out and grabbed the rough bark of the spruce tree to steady myself. Mark leaned forward and poured water for the woman in the wheelchair. His movements were tender, attentive. He touched her hand, stroking her knuckles with his thumb. It was a gesture of intimacy that he had stopped giving me years ago. Then, a blur of motion caught my eye. A small boy, maybe 5 years old, came running from the direction of the hot chocolate station. He was wearing miniature skiing gear and had a face full of whipped cream. He ran straight to the leather sofa. "Daddy," the boy squealed. My breath hitched. The world tilted on its axis. Mark turned. His face lit up with a genuine, beaming smile. A smile I had not seen in a decade. He opened his arms. "Hey, buddy," Mark said, his voice carrying clearly over the murmur of the crowd. "Did you save some marshmallows for me?" The boy launched himself into Mark's arms. Mark caught him easily, lifting him up and settling him onto his lap. He kissed the boy's cheek, wiping away the whipped cream with his thumb. "Daddy, Grandma said we can open one present tonight," the boy chirped. "Can we, please?" Mark looked at Sarah, the woman in the wheelchair. She smiled softly and nodded. "Ask your mother," Mark said playfully to the boy. "Mommy said yes if you said yes," the boy shouted. My vision began to tunnel. The edges of the room went black. Daddy, Mommy, Grandma. It was a complete unit, a perfect, geometric shape of a family. I stood there, paralyzed, a ghost haunting a celebration I was never invited to. The pieces of the last 7 years slammed into place with the force of a freight train. The late nights at the office, the weekend business trips, the refusal to let me meet his family because they were too traditional or too judgmental or too sick, the secrecy about his finances, the way he kept his phone face down. He had not just been cheating, he had been living a double life. I was not the girlfriend. I was not the partner. I was the mistress. I was the side piece. I was the automated teller machine that funded his life with them. I watched as Mark pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, the box from Sapphire Peaks. He handed it to the woman in the wheelchair. "For you, my love," he said. "Merry Christmas." Sarah opened the box. Even from 20 feet away, I saw the sparkle of the emeralds. She gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was a kiss of deep familiarity. Of ownership, I felt a physical blow to my chest, as if someone had swung a sledgehammer into my sternum. I could not breathe. The air in the room felt thick. Like syrup, I needed to leave. If I stayed 1 second longer, I would either scream or vomit, and I did not want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the tableau of domestic bliss. Mark laughed at something the boy said, ruffling his hair. He looked so happy. He looked complete. I turned and stumbled toward the heavy wooden doors. I pushed them open and spilled out into the freezing night. The cold air hit my wet face. I had not realized I was crying, and turned the tears to ice instantly. I reached the truck and collapsed against the dirty metal door, sliding down until I hit the snowy pavement. I wrapped my arms around my knees, burying my face in my coat. I did not scream. I did not wail. I just sat there in the dark, shivering violently, while inside the warm, golden lodge, the man I had loved for 7 years played father to another woman's son, wearing a sweater bought with my money. I did not drive back to Connecticut. I physically could not. The adrenaline that had propelled me up the mountain had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, trembling exhaustion that felt like hypothermia of the soul. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely turn the ignition key to start the heater, which rattled and coughed hot dust into the cab of the truck. I found a place called the Pines Motor Inn, 3 miles down the road from the luxury resort. It was the kind of place that charged $60 a night and smelled permanently of stale cigarette smoke and pine-scented cleaning fluid. The neon sign outside buzzed with a dying flicker. The letter M in motel burned out completely. I checked in using cash I had found in the glove compartment, avoiding eye contact with the night clerk, a man with grease-stained fingers who looked at my tear-streaked face and disheveled appearance with utter indifference. He handed me a physical key attached to a green plastic diamond. Room 12. Once inside, I locked the deadbolt and the chain. I stripped off my heavy coat and collapsed onto the bed. The mattress was hard, the sheets thin and scratchy. I lay there for a long time, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a spreading bruise. I needed to vomit, but my stomach was empty. I needed to scream, but my throat was closed shut. Instead, I reached for my laptop. I was a nurse. My training had taught me that before you can treat a trauma, you must assess the damage. You have to look at the wound. No matter how grotesque it is, you have to probe the edges to see how deep the rot goes. I opened the laptop, the screen illuminating the dark, dingy room. I typed the name into the search bar. Sarah, White Pine Resort. Mark Anderson, the internet. Unlike Mark, did not lie. It took me less than 10 minutes to find them. Not on social media. Mark had always told me he hated social media, claiming it was for narcissists, but in the society pages of regional newspapers and business journals. Sarah van der Hoven Andersen. The name sounded like old money. It sounded like trust funds and private schools. I clicked on an article from Vermont Life magazine, dated 4 years ago. The headline read, Hotel heiress Sarah van der Hoven discusses living with multiple sclerosis and the support of her loving family. There was a photograph. It was professionally lit, taken in a sunroom filled with orchids. Sarah was sitting in her wheelchair, looking ethereal and brave. Standing behind her, with a hand protectively on her shoulder. It was Mark. He was wearing a tuxedo. I scrolled down to the text. My husband, Mark, has been my rock. Sarah says, since my diagnosis shortly after our wedding in 2018, he has taken over the management of my family's charitable foundation so I can focus on my health. 2018. I did the math. I counted on my fingers, staring at my own hand as if it belonged to a stranger. I met Mark in 2017. We celebrated our 7-year anniversary 2 months ago. He did not leave me for her. He had married her while he was with me. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, sharp and breathless. I scrolled further. There were more photos. A charity gala in Boston, a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new hospital wing, a baptism for their son, Leo. In every photo, Mark looked the part of the devoted, aristocratic husband. He wore suits I had never seen. He smiled in a way I had forgotten he could. But then I noticed something else. In the article about the charity gala, there was a mention of the generous donation made by the Anderson family. Mark was quoted talking about his success in private equity investment. Private equity. Mark was a pharmaceutical sales representative. At least, that is what he told me. That was why he traveled so much. That was why his income was commission-based and fluctuating. I opened a new tab and logged into my bank account. Then, I logged into the joint savings account we had opened for our future house. Then I pulled up the spreadsheet where I tracked my personal loans to him. I began the autopsy of my finances. Date: November 12th, 2019. Transfer: $8,000 to Mark Anderson. Reason: emergency surgery for mom's heart valve. I cross-referenced the date with the society pages. 2 days after that transfer, there was a photo of Mark and Sarah in Paris. Sarah was wearing a new Chanel coat. Mark was wearing a bespoke Italian suit. Date: July 4th, 2021. Transfer: $15,000. Reason: legal fees to stop the bank from taking the house. I looked at the calendar. That was the week of his 5th wedding anniversary with Sarah. They had renewed their vows in a private ceremony in Martha's Vineyard. The cost of a private venue rental there started at exactly $15,000. The pattern emerged, undeniable and sickening. I was not just the mistress. I was the venture capitalist for his double life. Mark was not rich. He was a leech. He had married a wealthy woman. Yes, but wealthy families like the Vanderhovens usually had ironclad prenuptial agreements and strict controls on their trust funds. Sarah probably paid for the house and the lifestyle, but she likely gave him no liquid cash. She probably controlled the purse strings. So, to keep up the appearance of being a successful private equity investor worthy of her, to buy her expensive gifts, to pay for his own gambling or side hobbies, he needed a cash cow. I was the cow. I sat up on the edge of the bed, the room spinning. I looked at the total sum at the bottom of my spreadsheet. $242,000. That was my life savings. That was the life insurance money from my father. That was every overtime shift I had worked for 7 years, standing on my feet for 12 hours at a time until my veins throbbed. I had effectively paid for his wedding ring. I had paid for his son's stroller. I had paid for the vintage wine they were drinking right now. I stood up and walked to the bathroom. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting a greenish hue on my skin. I looked in the mirror. I expected to see a victim. I expected to see a sad, heartbroken woman, but the face staring back at me was pathetic. My eyes were swollen. My hair was greasy. I was wearing sweatpants with a stain on the knee. I looked like exactly what I was, the desperate, gullible fool who stayed home while the real wife lived in luxury. "You are so stupid," I whispered to my reflection. The words hissed out between my teeth. "You are so incredibly stupid." I thought about all the times I had apologized to him, all the times I had thanked him for sticking by me through my anxiety, all the times I had felt lucky that a man like him wanted a simple girl like me. He did not want me. He needed me. I was the only person in his life he could control completely. I was his safety net. If Sarah ever cut him off, he had me and my steady income to fall back on. A wave of nausea hit me, stronger this time. I leaned over the toilet and dry heaved, my body convulsing with the physical force of the betrayal. My stitches burned like fire. I collapsed onto the cold tile floor of the bathroom, curling into a fetal position. My phone dinged from the other room. I crawled back to the bed and picked it up. It was a text from Mark. "Babe, made it to Mom's. The roads were hell. She is sleeping now, so I cannot talk. Going to crash. Miss you. Hope you are resting. Love you." I stared at the screen. He was lying to me while lying in bed next to his wife. He probably typed that message in the bathroom of their luxury suite, maybe while the water for his bath was running. He thought he was safe. He thought I was 200 miles away, drugged up and asleep, waiting for him like a loyal dog. He had no idea that the codependent Taylor, the weak Taylor, was dying on the floor of a $60 motel room. I looked at the text again. "Love you." I deleted the message. I sat up. The tears had stopped. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. It felt like the moment during a trauma code, when the patient flatlines and the room goes silent before the defibrillator charges. I was done crying. I looked at the laptop screen again, at Sarah's smiling face. She looked kind. She looked vulnerable in that wheelchair. She was a victim too, even if she did not know it. Mark was playing us both. He was feeding off her status and my labor. I was not going to go home. I was not going to confront him with a screaming phone call that he could just hang up on. I was going to destroy him. But to do that, I needed to get close. I needed to get inside the fortress. I looked at the article about Sarah again. I noticed a detail I had missed before. The article mentioned her struggle with finding reliable home care during the holidays because of the remote location of their estate. It is hard to keep staff up here in the mountains during Christmas. Sarah admitted, "I was a registered nurse. I had 10 years of experience in trauma and critical care. I had specialized certifications in managing chronic conditions." I opened my email. I drafted a new message. I attached my resume, my real resume, the one that showed I was highly overqualified for a private home care job. I found the email address for the Vanderhoven Foundation on their website. Subject: urgent availability. Private nursing care. Holiday season. My fingers hovered over the send button. If I did this, there was no turning back. If I walked into that lion's den, I would have to look him in the eye and pretend I did not know him. I would have to serve the woman who had the life I wanted. It would be psychological torture, but the alternative was going home and letting him get away with it. The alternative was letting him come back in 3 days and lie to my face again. I pressed send. I closed the laptop. I turned off the light. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside. For the first time in 7 years, I did not feel afraid of the dark. I felt like I was part of it. I did not sleep. Sleep is for the innocent, and I had lost my innocence somewhere on the snowy pavement of the parking lot the night before. I lay in the motel bed, watching the digital clock flip its numbers. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. At 8:15, my phone rang. It was a local Vermont number. I sat up, clearing my throat to ensure my voice sounded like that of a competent professional, not a woman who had spent the night staring at a water stain on the ceiling. "This is Taylor," I answered. "Good morning, Taylor. This is Margaret, Mrs. Vanderhoven Anderson's personal assistant. We received your email this morning. It was Soitinghao Ling. 2# is greater than surprisingly timed. We actually had a nurse quit late last night due to a family emergency. Mrs. Anderson is very interested in your trauma background. Can you come to the Grand Chalet for an interview? I can be there in 30 minutes. I said, "Excellent. Do not go to the main lobby. Come to the private elevator bank on the north side. The security code is 7742. Soitinghao Ling." 2. I hung up. I went to the bathroom and splashed ice-cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were still red-rimmed, but I applied a layer of concealer, thick enough to hide the heartbreak. I pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. I put on the clean set of scrubs I kept in my emergency go bag in the truck. Navy blue. In the crisp, utilitarian. I was no longer Taylor, the girlfriend. I was Taylor, the registered nurse. I was putting on a uniform, but in my mind, it felt more like body armor. I drove back to the resort. The morning sun was blinding, reflecting off the pristine white snow. It was a beautiful Christmas morning for everyone else. For me, it was the start of a war. I punched the code into the private elevator. The doors slid open silently, and the car ascended smoothly, leaving the noise of the common tourists far below. When the doors opened onto the penthouse floor, I stepped into a world of quiet, understated opulence. The floors were heated slate. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the mountain range. A woman in a sharp black suit, Margaret, I assumed, met me and led me down a hallway lined with modern art. "Mrs. Anderson is in the solarium," she said softly. "Please, keep your voice down. Her head is sensitive this morning." We entered a sun-drenched room filled with orchids. Sarah was there, sitting in her motorized wheelchair by the window, without the heavy coat and scarf I had seen her wearing last night. She looked even more fragile. Her limbs were thin, her skin translucent, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent. They were the eyes of a woman who was used to people underestimating her because of her physical state. And sitting across from her, sipping coffee from a delicate china cup, was Evelyn. My breath hitched in my throat. Mark's mother, the woman whose failing heart and crippling medical bills had drained my bank account for 3 years. She was not in a hospital bed. She was not hooked up to oxygen. She was wearing a silk robe that looked like it cost more than my car. She looked healthy, flush with color, and was currently buttering a croissant with a steady hand. I dug my fingernails into my palms so hard I felt the skin break. The physical pain was the only thing keeping me from lunging across the table. "Thank you, Margaret," Sarah said. Her voice was soft but commanding. She turned her wheelchair to face me. "So, you are Taylor. Your resume is impressive. 10 years in trauma? Why do you want to babysit a woman with multiple sclerosis for the holidays?" I stepped forward. I did not smile. Nurses in trauma units do not smile. We assess. I prefer working holidays. "Mrs. Anderson." I lied smoothly. The hospitals are usually chaotic. Private care allows me to focus on one patient. And frankly, The pay is better. Sarah studied me. She seemed to appreciate the bluntness. She hated pity. I could see that in her jawline. This is my mother-in-law. Evelyn. Sarah gestured. Evelyn looked me up and down over the rim of her coffee cup. Her eyes were cold, judgmental beads. She had the look of a woman who had never worked a day in her life but judged everyone who did. You look young, Evelyn sniffed. Do you know how to handle a transfer board? Sarah cannot stand on her own some mornings. I have moved 200-pound men with gunshot wounds from gurneys to operating tables. Ma'am, I said, my voice flat and icy. I think I can manage. Evelyn raised an eyebrow, surprised by my tone. Sarah, however, let out a small, dry chuckle. I like her, Sarah said. She is not fawning over me. Sarah rolled closer to me. Look, Taylor, my husband is Saoyu Tsinghao Ling. 2# is greater than protective. He tries to do everything himself, but he is exhausted. He is out skiing right now. I practically forced him to go take a break. But when he comes back, he is going to try to fire you. He thinks no one is good enough to take care of me. Can you handle an overbearing husband? A dark, twisted amusement curled in my gut. Can I handle him? I have been handling his bills for 7 years. I am very good at managing difficult family members. I said, I focus on the patient. The husband is just background noise. Sarah nodded, satisfied. You are hired, she said. $2,000 for the week, plus room and board. You can stay in the staff quarters on this floor. Can you start immediately? Immediately, I said. Good. My meds are on the counter. I need my morning interferon injection. My hands are shaking too much to do it myself today. I walked over to the counter. I saw the familiar vials. I saw the syringes. My hands were steady. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were stone. As I prepped the needle, Evelyn spoke up again. Where are you from? Dear, you have a bit of an accent. Connecticut? I froze for a fraction of a second. I am from nowhere, in particular, I said, not turning around. I move around a lot, travel nursing. It must be lonely. Evelyn said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. A pretty girl like you, all alone on Christmas. No boyfriend. I turned around, holding the syringe. I looked Evelyn dead in the eye. I had a boyfriend. I said, we were together for 7 years. I supported him. I loved him, but it turned out he was Saoyu Tsinghao Ling. 2# is greater than engaged elsewhere, Evelyn tooted, shaking her head as she took a bite of her croissant. Men, she sighed. They are all disappointments eventually. You are better off focusing on your career. Dear, the irony was so thick it tasted like blood. She was sitting there, eating breakfast paid for by her son's wife, wearing clothes likely bought with my money, lecturing me on the disappointment of men. I walked over to Sarah. Ready? I asked. Sarah nodded. I administered the injection with professional precision. Sarah did not even flinch. Thank you. She exhaled. You have a good touch. Much better than Mark. He always hesitates. He never hesitates when he lies. I thought, he only hesitates when he has to do something real. Just then, the heavy oak front door of the chalet bared a sound. The electronic lock beeped. I hear him, Sarah said, her face lighting up. That is Mark. My stomach dropped to my feet. I turned my back to the door, pretending to dispose of the needle in the sharps container. I heard the heavy stomp of ski boots, the sound of a zipper being undone. Babe, Mark's voice boomed through the hallway. Vibrant, happy, alive. The snow is incredible today. You should have seen the run I just did. I wish you could have been there. He walked into the solarium, bringing the smell of cold air and expensive cologne with him. He was glowing with health, his cheeks flushed red from the wind. He stopped when he saw the blue scrubs. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice dropping. Sarah smiled. "Mark, this is Taylor," she said. "The agency sent her over. She is our new holiday nurse." I turned around slowly. I did not glare. I did not cry. I arranged my face into a mask of polite, professional indifference. I looked at the man who had kissed my forehead 24 hours ago and told me he was going to a dying woman's bedside. "Hello, Mr. Anderson," I said. Mark went pale. It was not a gradual paling. It was instant. The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he was going to faint. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His blue eyes went wide, darting from me to Sarah, then back to me. Terrified, he looked like he had seen a ghost, and in a way, he had. He was looking at the woman he had murdered emotionally, standing in his living room, holding a syringa. "Mark?" Sarah asked, frowning. "Are you okay? You look like you are going to be sick." Mark swallowed hard. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. Sao yu ting ha ling. Due cancelletto e maggiore. I am fine," he stammered. His voice was a cracked whisper. "Just Sao yu ting ha ling. 2 is greater than altitude sickness." Dizzy, he stared at me, pleading silently with his eyes, begging me not to speak, begging me not to ruin the life he had built on lies. I held his gaze. I let the silence stretch out, heavy and suffocating. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in. "You should sit down, Mr. Anderson," I said, stepping closer to him. My voice was calm, helpful, and terrifyingly familiar to him. "You look like you are in shock. Can I get you a glass of water?" Mark backed away from me, stumbling slightly in his ski boots. "No," he choked out. "No water. I just need Sao yu ting ha ling. 2 is greater than I need to change." He fled the room. He did not walk. He ran. I watched him go. Sarah looked at me apologetically. "I told you he was weird about new staff." She sighed. "Do not take it personally, Taylor." "Oh, I never take work personally, Mrs. Anderson," I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "I just do what needs to be done." I looked at the empty doorway where Mark had vanished. "Run, Mark," I thought. "Run as fast as you can." But you are trapped in here with me now. The Grand Chalet was a masterpiece of architectural cruelty. The open concept design meant there were no walls to hide behind, no corners to catch one's breath. Sound carried. Every footstep, every whisper, every nervous clinking of silverware against china amplified into the high, vaulted ceilings. For Mark, this house had become a glass cage. For the next 6 hours, I watched him unravel. It was a slow, agonizing disintegration, like watching a thread being pulled from a cheap sweater. I spent the afternoon organizing Sarah's medical suite, which was better equipped than some rural clinics I had worked in. I sorted her interferons, her muscle relaxants, and her pain management schedule. I moved with the silent efficiency of a ghost, wearing my navy scrubs like a second skin. Mark stayed in the bedroom for 2 hours. Sarah told me he was napping off the altitude sickness, but I knew better. He was in there pacing, He was hyperventilating. He was trying to figure out if I was going to walk into the living room and detonate a grenade in the middle of his perfect life. I went to the kitchen to prepare Sarah's afternoon herbal tea. The kitchen was massive, featuring a 6-burner Wolf range and a Sub-Zero refrigerator hidden behind mahogany paneling. I was waiting for the kettle to boil when I felt him behind me. The air shifted. The scent of fear is distinct. It smells like sour sweat and stale alcohol. I did not turn around. I reached for the canister of chamomile. "What do you want, Taylor?" Mark hissed. His voice was a jagged whisper, right at my ear. I turned slowly. Mark was standing too close, his face pale and clammy. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years since breakfast. "I am making tea for your wife, Mr. Anderson," I said calmly. "She prefers a touch of honey, correct? Or do you not know how she takes her tea?" "Stop it," he snapped, looking over his shoulder toward the living room where Sarah was reading to their son. "Leo, why are you doing this? Are you insane? You cannot just show up here. You have to leave. Now." I tilted my head, studying him. It was fascinating to see the bully reduced to a beggar. "I cannot leave," I said softly. "I signed a contract. Abandoning a patient is grounds for losing my nursing license. You know how hard I worked for that license. Mark, you were there when I studied for the boards. Remember? You sat on the couch playing video games while I made flashcards. How much?" he demanded, his hand shaking as he reached into his pocket. "Is that what this is? Blackmail? I will write you a check. 10,000. Just take it and go." I let out a short, dry laugh. $10,000? I asked. "That does not even cover the interest on the loans I gave you. Mark, you owe me $250,000. Do you have that in your pocket?" He flinched. Haoling. 2# is greater than I can get it." He stammered. "I just need time. Sarah has assets. I can move some things around. Just do not tell her. Please, Taylor. She is sick. The stress could kill her." I stepped closer to him. The rage inside me was a cold, solid thing, like a block of ice in my stomach. "You did not care about stress killing me when you left me bleeding after surgery," I whispered. "You did not care about stress when you drained my father's life insurance. Do not use her illness as a shield for your cowardice." He opened his mouth to argue, but we heard the hum of Sarah's electric wheelchair approaching the kitchen. Mark instantly jumped back 3 feet. He grabbed a dish towel and started wiping a spot on the perfectly clean granite counter, his movements frantic and jerky. "Is the tea ready?" Sarah asked. Rolling into the room, Mark spun around, a manic smile plastered on his face. It was grotesque, like a mask that did not fit properly. "Almost, babe," he chirped. "Taylor and I were just Haoling. 2# is greater than getting acquainted. Discussing your schedule." Sarah looked at Mark, then at me. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She was a perceptive woman. She lived in a body that betrayed her, so she had learned to rely on her instincts. "You look sweaty, Mark," she observed. "It is just the heating," he lied quickly. "They have the thermostat cranked up way too high in here. I am going to go check on Leo." He fled the kitchen again. Sarah watched him go, a small frown creasing her forehead. She turned to me. "He is acting strange," she said. "Stranger than usual. He seems Haoling. 2# is greater than anxious." I offered carefully. I poured the hot water into the cup. "Sometimes When family members are overwhelmed by caregiving, they exhibit signs of guilt or displacement. It is common. Sarah took the cup, her hands trembling slightly. Guilt? She repeated. Why would he feel guilty? He does everything for me. I did not answer. I just let the word hang in the air, heavy and pregnant with implication. I was not there to tell her the truth. I was there to help her find it herself. Dinner was a piece of theater that bordered on the absurd. I was asked to join them at the table, a request from Sarah that I could not refuse without seeming rude. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, still in my scrubs, while the family ate roast duck and wild rice. The dining room was illuminated by candlelight. A fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the snow fell softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the picture of a Hallmark Christmas movie. If the leading man was not on the verge of a cardiac event, I watched Mark interact with Leo. This was the hardest part. Mark was a good father. That was the knife in my heart. He cut Leo's meat into tiny, bite-sized pieces. He listened intently as the boy rambled on about a cartoon snowman. He wiped the sauce off Leo's chin with a gentleness that made my chest ache. He had told me, for 7 years, that he never wanted children. He told me he was too selfish, too busy, too damaged to be a dad. I do not want to ruin a kid with my genes. Taylor, he had said, it was a lie. He just did not want children with me. Watching him now, I realized I was grieving a life that never existed. I was grieving the potential of him. Mr. Anderson, I said, breaking the silence. My voice was polite, conversational. Mrs. Anderson mentioned you work in private equity. That must be a demanding field given the current market volatility. Mark dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against his china plate, sending a piece of duck flying onto the white tablecloth. Leo giggled. Daddy made a mess. Mark's face turned a deep crimson. He scrambled to pick up the fork. It, Saoyutsing Haling, 2 hash is greater than it has its moments, he muttered, not looking at me. I imagine, I continued, taking a sip of water. I have a friend in finance in New York. He says the hours are brutal. He can barely leave his desk, let alone take week-long trips. You are lucky to have such flexibility. Sarah looked at Mark. Taylor is right, Sarah said. You have been traveling a lot less this year. Mark, is the firm doing okay? Mark chugged his wine. It was a vintage Bordeaux. I watched his throat work as he swallowed. The firm is fine. Sarah, he snapped. Why is everyone interrogating me about work tonight? It is Christmas Eve. Can we just enjoy the dinner? His tone was sharp, aggressive. Sarah flinched. The boy, Leo, stopped smiling. I am sorry, Sarah said quietly. Saoyutsing Haling. 2 hash is greater than you never talk about work anymore. I do not talk about it because it is boring, Mark said, refilling his glass with a shaking hand. He spilled a few drops of red wine onto the tablecloth. It bloomed like fresh bloodstains. Silence descended on the table. The warmth had been sucked out of the room. I sat back, watching. I did not need to say anything else. Mark was doing the work for me. He was so terrified of being exposed that he was becoming defensive and erratic, damaging the very relationship he was trying to protect. Later that night, after Leo was asleep and Mark had retreated to the den with a bottle of scotch, I helped Sarah get ready for bed. This was the intimate reality of nursing, the stripping away of dignity, the vulnerability of the human body. I helped Sarah transfer from her chair to the bed. Her legs were atrophied. Useless, dead weight. I had to lift her. My arms wrapped around her torso, her head resting on my shoulder. She smelled of lavender and expensive lotion. She felt so light once she was settled against the pillows. I began the nightly massage of her calves to prevent cramping. "Taylor?" she asked into the semi-darkness. "Yes." "Mrs. Anderson? Do you think my husband is having an affair?" My hands paused on her leg for a fraction of a second, then resumed their rhythmic motion. "That is a very specific question," I said neutrally. "Why would you ask me that?" Sarah Seahill, staring up at the ceiling. "You are an outsider. You see things clearly. Tonight at dinner, Sao Yuting Haling, 2 hashes greater than he was so defensive. And the way he looks at you, Sao Yuting Haling, 2 Raut ist größer als I froze. How does he look at me?" I asked. "Like he is afraid of you," Sarah whispered. "Or like he hates you." I cannot tell which. I moved to her other leg. "Fear and hate are often the same thing," I said. "But to answer your question, Sao Yuting Haling, 2 hash is greater than people usually get defensive when they feel cornered. Whether that is because of an affair, or financial trouble, or just burnout, Sao Yuting Haling, 2 hash is greater than only he knows." Sarah turned her head to look at me. Her eyes were wet. "He is gone so much," she said. "He says it is for business, but the bank accounts, Sao Yuting Haling, 2 hash is greater than I do not see the returns. And the money going out, Sao Yuting Haling, 2 hash is greater than it is confusing. He says he is investing in startups, but I never see the paperwork." This was it. The door was open. "If you are concerned about the finances, Mrs. Anderson, you should ask for an audit," I said softly. "Not as a wife, but as the primary beneficiary of the estate. It is your right. Transparency is the only way to alleviate anxiety." She nodded slowly. "An audit," she repeated. "Yes, maybe you are right." I pulled the duvet up to her chin. "Sleep now," I said. "We can worry about the rest tomorrow." I turned off the bedside lamp. As I walked out of the master suite, I saw Mark sitting in the hallway. He was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, the bottle of scotch between his legs. He looked pathetic. He looked up at me as I closed the door. "Did you tell her?" He slurred. I looked down at him. "I did not have to." I said, "You are telling her with every breath you take. You reek of guilt." "Mark, it is coming off you in waves." He laughed. A bitter, wet sound. "You think you are so superior," he muttered. "You think you are the victim, but you enjoyed the money. Taylor, you enjoyed the dinners I bought you. You enjoyed the trips. I paid for those dinners." "Mark," I said, my voice ice cold. "I paid for the trips. I paid for the damn suit you are wearing. I did not enjoy your money. I enjoyed my own money, filtered through your lies to make you feel like a man." He winced as if I had slapped him. "Go to bed." "Mark," I said, "before you pass out, and I have to document it in the nursing notes as a substance abuse incident." I stepped over his legs and walked down the hall to the staff quarters. I went into my small room and locked the door. I sat on the narrow bed and took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the kill. I was systematically dismantling his life, brick by brick. I had turned his wife's suspicion into a weapon. I had turned his own home into a prison. But as I lay down, staring at the ceiling, I felt a heavy stone of sadness in my gut. Sarah was a good person. She loved him. She trusted him. Destroying him meant destroying her peace. I was not just the avenger anymore. I was the executioner. and the blade was falling on both of them. Christmas Day arrived not with the gentle peace of a carol, but with the suffocating tension of a bomb squad trying to defuse a device with trembling hands. The Grand Chalet had been transformed into a winter wonderland for the Vanderhoven annual holiday soiree. The massive living area was filled with 50 of the resort's most elite guests: senators, hedge fund managers, and old money matriarchs draped in velvet and diamonds. I stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, looking down at the party like a gargoyle perched on a cathedral. I was no longer wearing my scrubs. Sarah had insisted that if I was to attend to her during the party, I must dress appropriately. I wore a simple black cocktail dress that I had found in the back of my truck, a dress Mark had bought me for a company dinner 3 years ago. It was modest, blending into the background, which was exactly where an executioner belonged. The air smelled of roasted prime rib, expensive perfume, and the distinct, crisp scent of fresh pine from the garlands draped over every railing. A string quartet played a melancholic version of Silent Night in the corner. Mark was down there, working the room. He looked impeccable in a midnight blue tuxedo. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand, gesturing broadly with the other as he entertained a group of investors. He was in his element, charming, charismatic, the perfect husband. If I did not know that he was hyperventilating in the bathroom an hour ago, I might have believed the performance myself, but I saw the cracks. I saw the way his eyes darted toward the staircase every 30 seconds, checking for me. I saw the way his hand shook slightly when he brought the glass to his lips. He was terrified. He knew I was a loose cannon, but he could not kick me out without causing a scene that would alert Sarah. He was trapped in a prison of his own social standing. I checked the sleek leather portfolio tucked under my arm. It looked like a standard medical chart holder. Inside, however, there were no vitals or medication schedules. Inside was the autopsy of a 7-year lie. I had spent the morning compiling it. I had printed out the bank statements I accessed from my laptop. I had included the screenshots of texts he sent me. Texts where he called Sarah the invalid and the cash cow. I included the photos of us in Cabo San Lucas. Dated clearly during weeks he told Sarah he was at a medical conference. And, most damning of all, the promissory notes, the legal IOUs he had signed to me, proving he was borrowing money from his mistress to maintain his lifestyle with his wife. I took a deep breath. My heart was a cold stone in my chest. It is time, I whispered to myself. I walked down the grand staircase. My heels clicked rhythmically on the marble steps. A countdown clock ticking toward 0. Mark saw me first. He froze mid-sentence, his smile faltering. He excused himself from the group of men and began to intercept me, walking briskly across the room. His eyes were wide with panic. "What are you doing?" he hissed when he got close enough, keeping his voice low so the guests would not hear. "Why are you down here? You are supposed to be in the kitchen prepping Sarah's meds." I sidestepped him effortlessly. "Mrs. Anderson asked me to bring her the evening update," I said loudly enough for a nearby waiter to hear. Mark grabbed my arm. His grip was painful, his fingers digging into my bicep. "Do not do this, Taylor," he begged. His voice was a mixture of rage and terror. "I will give you anything. I will sign over the car. I will get you the cash. Just turn around and walk away." I looked down at his hand on my arm. "Get your hand off me." "Mark," I said, "or I will scream assault right here in front of the senator." He released me instantly, as if he had been burned. I walked past him toward the center of the room where Sarah was holding court. She was sitting in her wheelchair, looking radiant in a silver gown, laughing at a story Evelyn was telling. Evelyn, sitting beside her, looked like the Queen Mother, basking in the reflected glory of the family wealth. Sarah looked up as I approached. "Oh, Taylor," she smiled. "Is it time for my pills already?" "Not quite, Mrs. Anderson," I said. My voice was steady, projecting slightly so that the conversation in the immediate circle died down. "But I found something today that I thought you needed to see immediately. It concerns the Haling. 2# is greater than discrepancy we discussed last night." Mark lunged forward. "Taylor, no," he shouted. The string quartet stopped playing. The sudden silence was deafening. 50 heads turned toward us. Mark's face was a mask of sheer desperation. He tried to laugh, looking around at the guests. "She is confused," he announced, his voice cracking. "This is our new nurse. She, Haling, 2# is greater than she has been having some mental health issues. The altitude is getting to her." He reached for the portfolio in my hands. I pulled it back sharply. "I am not confused, Mark," I said clearly. "And I am not just the nurse." I handed the portfolio to Sarah. Sarah looked from Mark to me, her expression shifting from confusion to dawn. She took the leather folder. Her hands, usually shaky from her condition, were strangely steady. "Sarah, do not open that," Mark pleaded. He fell to his knees beside her wheelchair, grabbing the armrest. "It is poison. She is trying to poison you against me. She is obsessed with me. Sarah, she is a stalker I had to get a restraining order against years ago. She followed us here, gaslighting, the final weapon of the narcissist. He was trying to rewrite reality in real time." In front of an audience, Sarah looked at him. For the first time, I saw disgust in her eyes. "If she is a stalker, Mark, why did you let her give me an injection this morning?" Sarah asked. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. Sarah opened the folder. The room was silent enough to hear the rustle of the paper. She looked at the first page. It was a photograph of Mark and me, arms around each other, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. The date stamp was November 12th, 2019. "I remember this," Sarah whispered. "You said you were in London for the merger." She turned the page. "Bank statements. Transfer to Mark Anderson, $15,000. She turned the page. A text message thread printed out. "Mark, just hold on a little longer. Babe, once the old lady kicks the bucket or signs the trust over, we are set for life. I hate touching her. It makes my skin crawl." Sarah gasped. It was a sound of pure physical pain. Evelyn leaned over and looked at the page. Her face went gray. "You, Haling, 2# is greater than you wrote this," Evelyn stammered, looking at her son. "You said touching Sarah made your skin crawl?" Mark stood up, backing away. "It is fake," he screamed. "She photoshopped it. It is all artificial intelligence. You know how technology is these days. She forged it." I stepped forward. "I did not forge the check you wrote to the Porsche dealership, using the money I lent you for your mother's imaginary heart surgery." "Mark," I said. The crowd gasped. Sarah looked up at me. Her eyes were swimming with tears, but her jaw was set in stone. "Who are you?" she asked me. "I am Taylor." I said, "I am the woman he has lived with in Connecticut for 7 years. I am the woman who nursed him when he had the flu. I am the woman who paid his credit card bills so his credit score would not tank. And I am the woman he left alone 3 days after surgery to come here and play house with you. I turned to the crowd. He told me he was coming home to visit his dying mother in a shack in New Hampshire. I said, gesturing to Evelyn, who was dripping in diamonds, I see the patient has made a miraculous recovery. Evelyn stood up, her face flushed with humiliation. Xiao Yuting Hao Ling. 2# is greater than I did not know, she stuttered, looking at the guests who were now whispering furiously. I thought he was an investor. He told me he made the money in stocks. You knew, I said, cutting her off. Maybe you did not know about me, but you knew he was spending her money. You liked the lifestyle too much to ask where the cash came from. Sarah closed the folder. She placed it calmly on her lap. She looked at Mark. He was standing in the center of the circle, sweating, panting, looking like a trapped animal. Is it true? She asked softly. Mark looked around the room. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the senator. He saw the sneer on the face of the hedge fund manager. He saw his social capital evaporating into smoke. He turned on me, his face twisted into a snarl of pure hatred. You bitch, he screamed. You ruined everything. You are nothing. You are a pathetic, needy little nurse who could not keep a man. So you had to destroy him. He lunged at me. Before I could flinch, 2 security guards who had been standing by the door stepped forward and grabbed him. They pinned his arms behind his back. Let me go, Mark roared, struggling. This is my house. I am the husband. Not anymore, Sarah said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. She maneuvered her wheelchair forward. Stopping just inches from Mark, she picked up the glass of red wine from the table next to her. You spent 6 years making me feel like a burden. Mark, she said, you made me feel like I should be grateful that a handsome, healthy man wanted to be with a cripple. You took my confidence. You took my money. She threw the wine. The dark red liquid splashed across his white tuxedo shirt, staining it like a gunshot wound. It dripped down his face, mixing with his sweat. Get him out of here, Sarah commanded the guards, and take his mother with him. What? Evelyn shrieked. Sarah, darling, please, I am innocent. I am family. You are an accomplice, Sarah said coldly. Get out, both of you, before I call the state police and have you arrested for fraud and elder abuse. The guards dragged Mark toward the door. He was kicking and screaming, spewing profanities that would make a sailor blush. Sarah, please, I love you. Do not listen to her, Mark yelled, desperate. Then he turned his head and locked eyes with me. I will kill you. Taylor, I will kill you for this. I stood my ground. I did not blink. You are already dead. Mark, I whispered, though he could not hear me over his own screaming. The heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice. Silence returned to the room. It was thick, heavy, and awkward. Sarah sat there, staring at the closed doors. Her chest was heaving. She looked small, broken, and incredibly lonely. I felt a pang of guilt sharp enough to pierce through my armor. I had won. I had exposed him, but the collateral damage was sitting in a wheelchair, crying silently in front of 50 strangers. I walked over to her. I am sorry, Mrs. Anderson, I said softly. Sarah looked up at me. Her mascara was running down her cheeks. Do not call me Mrs. Anderson, she said. That name is a lie. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. You should go, Taylor, she said. I nodded. I understand. No, she said, shaking her head. I mean, Xiao Yuting Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than thank you. But please, just go. I cannot look at you. You are the proof that my life was a joke. Every time I see you, I see him. I understood. I was the mirror she did not want to look into. I turned to leave. Wait, Sarah called out. Saluting Holling. 2 hash is greater than I stopped. Did you love him? She asked. The question hung in the air. The guests were pretending not to listen, but I knew every ear was strained toward us. Did I love him? I thought about the 7 years, the shared coffees, the dreams of a house, the way he used to hold me when I had panic attacks, before he started using those attacks against me. Yes, I said, my voice breaking for the first time that night. I loved him enough to destroy myself for him, and that is why you had to destroy him, Sarah said, because hate is just love that has been betrayed. Saluting Holling. 2 hash is greater than I nodded. Goodbye, Sarah. I walked out of the ballroom, past the stunned guests, past the string quartet that was hesitantly starting to play Jingle Bells. I walked out into the cold, dark corridor. My legs felt like jelly. I leaned against the wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. It was done. The explosion was over, but as the adrenaline faded, the reality set in. I was alone. I was 200 miles from home. I had no boyfriend. I had no money yet, and I had just nuked the last 7 years of my life. I put my head in my hands. Inside the ballroom, the party was slowly resuming. The rich move on quickly from tragedy. It is just entertainment to them. But for me, sitting in the hallway in my cocktail dress, the silence was absolute. The aftermath of a social execution is quieter than the event itself, but far more brutal in its efficiency. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the staff quarters, looking down at the resort's main entrance. The blizzard had picked up again, the snow swirling in violent, chaotic eddies under the amber glow of the security lights. Inside the penthouse, the air was thick with the hushed, urgent voices of damage control. Sarah was not crying anymore. The weeping woman in the wheelchair had vanished, replaced by the heiress of the Van der Hoeven Empire. I could hear her voice from the living room, sharp and metallic, slicing through the air like a guillotine blade. Cancel them all, she was saying into her phone. The Black American Express, the corporate visa, the joint checking access. I want him to have zero liquidity by midnight. If he tries to buy a pack of gum at a gas station, I want the card to decline. I zipped up my duffel bag. My hands felt heavy, numb. I had packed my scrubs, my regular clothes, and the empty vial of interferon I had administered that morning. It felt like a lifetime ago. I walked out into the hallway. Margaret, the assistant, was rushing past with a stack of legal documents. She stopped when she saw me, her expression a mix of awe and fear. Mrs. Anderson is with the lawyers on a conference call, Margaret said breathlessly. She said to give you this. She handed me a white envelope. I opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $5,000, more than double what we had agreed upon. She said it is severance, Margaret whispered, and hush money, though she knows you likely will not talk. She just wants this. So Yutsing Hao Ling. 2 hash is greater than erased. I looked at the check. It was just paper. It could not buy back the 7 years I had wasted, but it was a start. I walked to the balcony that overlooked the porte cochere. The biting wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes, but I did not blink. I needed to see this. I needed to witness the final act. Down below, The heavy oak doors of the lodge burst open. 2 burly security guards, men built like linebackers in high-visibility jackets, marched Mark and Evelyn out into the snow. They did not handle them gently. Mark stumbled, his patent leather dress shoes slipping on the icy pavement. He was still wearing his tuxedo, but the white shirt was stained purple with wine, a scarlet letter of his humiliation. He looked small against the vastness of the winter night. He was shivering violently, his arms wrapped around his chest. Evelyn was worse. She was wailing, a high-pitched, keen sound that cut through the wind. She was clutching her sequined shawl, her high heels useless on the ice. She looked like a melted candle, all her grandeur dissolving into a puddle of misery. "My Louis Vuitton!" Mark screamed, turning back toward the doors. "You cannot keep my bags. That is theft." One of the guards stepped forward and tossed 2 bags onto the wet pavement. They landed with a wet thud, sliding into a slush puddle. "Get off the property." "Mr. Anderson," the guard boomed. His voice echoed off the stone walls. "You are trespassing. If you are not gone in 5 minutes, we are calling the state troopers." I watched Mark scramble for the bags. He looked frantic, pathetic. He wiped the slush off the expensive leather with his sleeve, caring more about the luggage than his own mother, who was sobbing by a concrete planter. "This is illegal!" Evelyn shrieked. "Do you know who we are?" "Nobody knows who you are." "A lady," the guard spat, "and nobody cares. Move." Mark dragged the bags toward the parking lot. He stopped and looked up for a second, across the distance and the falling snow. His eyes found me on the balcony. I did not wave. I did not smile. I just stood there, a silent sentinel in the dark. I saw his mouth move. He shouted something, but the wind tore the words away before they reached me. It did not matter. I knew what he was saying. He was blaming me. He would always blame me. That is the nature of a narcissist. They are the heroes of every story, even the tragedies they write themselves. He dragged Evelyn toward the dark corner of the lot where my Audi Q5 was parked. I felt a twinge of annoyance. That was technically my lease, though he drove it. I could have gone down there and demanded the keys. I could have left him stranded in the mountains, but I let him take it, let him have the car. He would need it to drive back to the wreckage of his life in Connecticut. I wanted him to come home. I wanted him to come to me when he realized he had nowhere else to go. The game was not over yet. This was just the end of the second act. I watched the taillights of the Audi flare red in the darkness, then fade as he drove away, disappearing down the winding mountain road. "Good riddance," a voice said behind me. "Xiao Yu Jing Hao Ling." 2 hashes greater than I turned. Sarah was sitting in her wheelchair in the doorway of the balcony. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her face was pale, scrubbed clean of makeup, looking younger and infinitely sadder. "I did not hear you approach," I said. "My battery is fully charged," she said with a dry, humorless smile. "Stealth mode." She rolled forward until she was next to the railing, looking out at the empty driveway. "Did he take the silver?" she asked. "I do not think so," I said. "He was too busy trying to save his luggage." Sarah nodded. "He always loved things more than people," she said softly. "I think he loved the idea of me, the heiress, the status, but he hated the reality of me, the sickness, the wheelchair. He used you." "Sarah," I said, "just like he used me." Sarah looked up at me. "But you let him use you." "Taylor, for 7 years. Why?" It was the question I had been avoiding. "Because I was lonely," I admitted. The truth tasted bitter. My dad was sick. Then he died. Mark was Haling. 2 hash is greater than a warm body. He was a distraction. I thought if I fixed him, I could fix myself. It is a common nurse complex. We think love is just another form of caretaking. Sarah Sihil, her breath plumed in the cold air. I am going to divorce him. Obviously, she said. My lawyers are drafting the papers tonight. He gets nothing. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, and with the proof of infidelity and financial fraud you provided, he will be lucky if I do not press criminal charges. She turned her wheelchair to face me fully. But you need to leave. Taylor, I know. I said, I mean it. She said, her voice hardening. Do not contact me. Do not try to be my friend. Do not ask for a reference. You saved me from him, and I am grateful. But you are also the woman who slept with my husband for 7 years while I was in the hospital getting infusions. I cannot look at you without feeling sick. I nodded. It was fair. I understand. I said, take the check. She said, buy yourself a new life. And Taylor, Haling, get. Yes, get therapy. You are just as broken as he is. You just hide it better. She pressed the joystick on her armrest and spun the chair around, disappearing back into the warmth of the chalet. The sliding glass door clicked shut, locking me out. I was alone on the balcony. The adrenaline that had sustained me for 24 hours finally crashed. My knees shook. I leaned against the railing, gripping the cold metal until my knuckles turned white. Below me, the party was over. Valets were bringing cars around for the guests. I could hear snippets of conversation drifting up. Did you see that scene? The husband was a fraud. Who was the woman in the black dress? Just the help. I think I was already becoming a rumor, a ghost story to be told over drinks next Christmas. I picked up my duffel bag and walked to the service elevator. I took it down to the basement level, avoiding the lobby. I walked out into the cold night air, trudging through the snow to the overflow lot where my father's rusted Ford truck waited. It looked like a heap of junk next to the gleaming sport utility vehicles of the resort guests. I unlocked the door and climbed in. The seat was freezing. The engine groaned in protest before coughing to life. I pulled out of the parking spot. I drove past the main entrance of the White Pine Resort one last time. I saw the lights, the garland, the illusion of perfection. I thought about Mark driving south in my Audi, terrified, broke, and angry. I thought about Sarah sitting in her penthouse, surrounded by lawyers and loneliness. And I thought about myself, driving a 20-year-old truck with $5,000 in my pocket and a hole in my chest where my heart used to be. Sarah was right. I was broken, but unlike Mark, I knew it. And unlike Sarah, I had nothing left to lose. I turned onto the highway, heading south. The snow was falling harder now, erasing the tire tracks on the road. By morning, there would be no trace that I had ever been here. But Mark would remember, and he was coming home to me. The drive back to Connecticut took 5 hours of white-knuckle silence. I arrived home on December 26th, the day after Christmas. The neighborhood was quiet. The festive lights on the other houses dimmed as if the world was hungover from the holiday. I walked into the house. The air inside was stale, smelling of pine needles that had begun to drop from the Douglas fir and the faint, lingering scent of Mark's sandalwood cologne. It felt like walking into a mausoleum. I did not unpack. I did not rest. I went straight to the kitchen cabinet, pulled out a box of heavy-duty black contractor bags, and began the purge. I treated the house like a trauma unit, that had been contaminated by an infectious disease. Sterilization was the only option. I started in the bathroom. His razor, his expensive face creams, the half-empty bottle of cologne. I swept them all into the trash bag with a violent clatter. I did not pause to smell them. I did not pause to remember. I moved to the bedroom. I stripped the sheets off the bed where he had lied to me for 7 years. I threw them into the bag. I opened his side of the closet. The suits I had paid for, the shoes I had polished, the casual cashmere sweaters he wore to look like a relaxed millionaire. I grabbed them by the armfuls and shoved them into the plastic abyss. Show, do not tell, I thought to myself as I worked. Show him he does not exist here anymore. By midnight, there were 12 black bags lined up by the curb, sitting in the slush like body bags. The house was stripped bare. The Christmas tree was gone, dragged out back to the compost pile. The mantel was empty. I sat in the middle of the living room floor with a bottle of wine. I was exhausted, my body aching from the drive and the physical labor. But my mind was razor sharp. Saoyuting Haoling, 2 hash is greater than I waited. I knew he would come. He had nowhere else to go. His mother had been humiliated and likely cut off. His wife had kicked him out. His credit cards were dead. He was a parasite, and a parasite always seeks out its original host when the new one rejects it. It took 2 days. On the evening of December 28th, a heavy sleet was falling against the windows, sounding like handfuls of gravel being thrown at the glass. Then, a knock. It was not the confident, rhythmic rap of the man who owned the place. It was a hesitant, desperate thud. I stood up. I smoothed down my sweater. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked calm. I looked like a woman who had just finished a long shift and was ready to handle a difficult patient. I walked to the door and opened it. Mark was standing on the porch. He was unrecognizable. The polished, arrogant man in the tuxedo was gone. In his place stood a shivering, disheveled wreck. He was wearing jeans that were stained with mud and a parka that looked 2 sizes too small. Probably something he had scavenged or bought at a thrift store with his last few dollars. His face was covered in a patchy, 3-day stubble. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights spent in a car. My Audi Q5 was parked in the driveway behind him. It was filthy, covered in road, salt, and grime. Taylor, he croaked. His voice was rough, broken. I did not step aside to let him in. I stood in the doorway, blocking the warmth of the house with my body. "Hello, Mark," I said. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of the old manipulation. He slumped his shoulders, trying to look pathetic, trying to trigger my nurse's instinct to care for the wounded. "Taylor, please," he whispered, shivering theatrically. "It is freezing. Let me in. I have been driving for 2 days. I have not eaten." Sarah, Saoyuting Haoling, 2 hash is greater than she went crazy. She took everything. She kicked my mother out on the street. She did not kick your mother out. "Mark," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "She kicked a fraud out. There is a difference." He flinched. He took a step forward, reaching for my hand. "Babe, listen to me. I know you are angry. You have every right to be, but you do not know the whole story. Sarah, Saoyuting Haoling, 2 hash is greater than she trapped me. I was trying to get away from her. I was doing it for us. I was trying to get the money so we could be free. I love you. You are the only one I have ever loved." It was a masterful performance. If this were 3 days ago, I might have believed it. I might have wrapped him in a blanket and made him soup. But the tailor who would have done that was dead. She died in a motel room in Vermont. I reached behind the door and picked up a manila envelope I had prepared. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me so he could not slip inside. The cold air bit at my skin, but I hardly felt it. "Stop acting, Mark," I said. "The show is over. The audience has gone home." I shoved the envelope into his chest. He grabbed it reflexively. "What is this?" he asked, looking down. "Open it," I commanded. He fumbled with the clasp, his fingers stiff from the cold. He pulled out the stack of papers. I watched his eyes scan the top document. It was a promissory note. "Do you remember these?" I asked softly. "Every time you needed money for your mother's imaginary surgeries, or for your business investments, or for the down payment on this house that never happened. Haling, 2# is greater than I made you sign a note. You laughed at me. You said I was being anal. You said it was just for my peace of mind." Mark looked up, confusion clouding his face. "Yeah. So? We are a couple? This is just paper. It is a legal contract." "Mark," I said, "I notarized every single one of them. You owe me $242,000 in principal, plus interest. The terms state that in the event of a default or a termination of our relationship, the full amount is due immediately." He laughed. It was a nervous, incredulous sound. "You are joking. You are going to sue me?" "I have nothing." "Taylor," Sarah froze the accounts. "I have $0. "I know," I said, stepping closer to him. "That is why I filed a lien against your future earnings this morning. I also spoke to a lawyer about fraud charges. You solicited funds under false pretenses. That is a felony." "Mark, it is called theft by deception." His face went white. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was not just broke. He was in debt to the person he thought he owned. "You, Haling, 2# is greater than you would not." He stammered. "You love me." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had consumed my 20s like a majestic meal and left me with the check. "I did love you," I said, "and that is why this has to happen. Because the only way you will ever learn is if you hit rock bottom. And Mark," I pointed to the driveway, "leave the keys to the Audi. The lease is in my name. You are not insured to drive it anymore." He stared at me, his mouth agape. "Where am I supposed to go?" He whispered. "It is 20 degrees out. I have no car. I have no money." I shrugged. It was the same shrug he had given me when he left me alone on Christmas Eve. "There is a shelter in downtown West Haven," I said. "They take check-ins until 10 o'clock. If you start walking now, you might make it." He looked at the papers in his hand, then back at me. His eyes filled with a sudden, terrifying rage. He crumpled the papers and threw them at my face. "You bitch," he screamed. "After everything I did for you, you are nothing without me." I did not flinch as the paper ball hit my shoulder. "I am free, Mark," I said. I snatched the keys to the Audi from his freezing hand before he could react. Then I turned around. I opened the front door. "Taylor?" he screamed. "Taylor, do not do this. I am sorry. Please, I will do anything." I stepped inside the warm, bright hallway. I looked at him one last time. He was standing in the sleet, a ghost of a man, fading into the darkness he had created. "Goodbye, Mark." I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. The click was the loudest, most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I leaned my forehead against the wood, listening. I heard him pounding on the door for a minute. Then, I heard sobbing. Then, finally, silence. I walked into the living room. The house was empty. The furniture was gone. The decorations were gone. It was just me. I sat down on the floor where the Christmas tree used to be. I poured myself a glass of wine. My hands were steady. I was alone. I was $200,000 poorer than I should have been. I had a broken heart and trust issues that would likely last a lifetime. But as I took a sip of the wine, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not pain. It was not fear. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes after a long, terrible storm. When the wind finally stops and you realize the house is still standing. The silence that followed Mark's departure was heavier than the storm outside. For a few minutes, I stood by the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. I watched as the dark figure of the man I had intended to marry stumbled down the driveway, his silhouette eventually swallowed by the sleet and the unforgiving darkness of the suburban night. He did not look back. There was no cinematic pause, no final plea. There was just the pathetic shuffle of a man who had played a high-stakes game against two women and lost everything. I walked back to the center of the living room and sat down on the hardwood floor. The house was quiet. It was a rental, but I had treated it like a temple for our future. Now, with the furniture gone and the walls bare, it looked exactly like what it was. A temporary shelter. I picked up the glass of wine. It was a Cabernet Sauvignon, rich and dark, the kind Mark used to say was too bold for my palate. I took a slow sip, letting the tannins coat my tongue. My phone buzzed on the floor next to me. It was an email notification from the real estate agent. I swiped the notification away. I had already listed the engagement ring, the one he had bought with my money, on a resale site. It would fetch enough to cover the deposit on a small studio apartment in the city. A place with no guest room. A place with no garage. A place just for me. I looked at the stack of documents on the floor. The lien against Mark. The signed promissory notes. The impending lawsuit. Mark was out there in the freezing rain, likely walking toward the homeless shelter downtown. He had no coat suitable for this weather. He had no money for a hot meal. He had no one to call because he had burned every bridge in his pursuit of a lifestyle he did not earn. A normal person might feel pity. A normal person might worry if he would survive the night. I waited for the pity to come. I waited for the familiar wave of codependent guilt to wash over me, telling me to run after him with a blanket and a checkbook. But it did not come. Instead, I felt a cold and sharp satisfaction. It was not happiness. Happiness is warm and light. This was dark and heavy, like a weapon you hold in your hand after a fight. It was the feeling of survival. I thought about Sarah up in her glass penthouse in Vermont. I wondered if she was drinking wine too. I wondered if she felt the same hollow ache in her chest. The phantom pain of a limb that had been amputated to save the body. We were sisters in this tragedy, connected by the same lie. Both of us poorer in heart, but wiser in spirit. I looked at the empty spot where the Christmas tree had stood. There were still a few pine needles scattered on the floor, dry and brown. 7 years. I had given him my youth. I had given him my trust. I had given him the best parts of myself. But tonight, I took something back. I picked up the promissory note. I ran my thumb over his signature. It was shaky, arrogant, scribbled in blue ink. He would spend the next decade paying me back. Every paycheck he earned, every dollar he scraped together, a percentage would come to me. He would never be free of me. I had become the burden he always accused me of being. I raised my glass to the empty room. Merry Christmas, Mark. I whispered into the silence. I took a long drink, draining the glass. Finally, we have a tradition that makes sense. You are out there in the cold, learning what it truly means to be alone. And I am in here, warm, counting the money that you thought was yours. I set the glass down. A single tear escaped my eye, hot and fast, tracking down my cheek. I let it fall. It was the last tear I would shed for the 7-year winter. Tomorrow, I would sell the truck. Tomorrow, I would meet the lawyers. Tomorrow, I would start the long, painful process of thawing out. But for tonight, I just sat in the dark and smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who had walked through fire and come out holding the match. The wind howled against the door, begging to be let in. I did not move.